I know I haven't been here for a while. I was here in July, I believe, for 3 Sundays in a row while Kristen was out. And it was fun because usually I come in, and Scott mentioned that I am a hospital chaplain, and so I don't get the opportunity to preach Sunday after Sunday. And so it was nice to get to know you all after worship and during the passing of the peace, which I think is pretty lively here. And so I open up my sermon with the story about my first time coming to New Jersey, which I hope that you all will enjoy. I remember the first day that I was going to seminary. I had just been in New Jersey maybe a week. I remember it like yesterday. I was dropping off my husband, who many of you know, at the train station. And right as I'm pulling out of the train traffic drop-off place, I look both ways, and I turn left out of the station to return to Route 1. Now, those of you who are not from New Jersey might know that turns in New Jersey are kind of quirky and done a little bit differently here. So I didn't really think twice about turning left, but I should have. As I approached the light, I saw a policeman on foot, which was also strange and alien to me. And so I thought, oh, that is so nice. He is directing traffic. So he pointed at my car and he told me to go backwards. And okay, great. See, people from New Jersey are nice. And so I moved my car back, and then the light turned green, and I waved at him, and I drove off. Not long after that, as you can imagine, as I've been giving these clues to you along the way, I saw not one, but 2 police cars with their lights on, signaling for me to pull over. Now then I thought, okay, something is a little bit off here. So he had a couple of not so nice things to say to me, and on top of that, because I hadn't registered my car in New Jersey yet, he towed it, and he gave me not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 tickets, and a ride back to the train station. It was not the best start to my residency here in New Jersey, as you all could imagine. He did say one thing, though. He said, make sure you go in when it's time to talk about, or time to pay your tickets, go before the judge and explain what happened. So about a month later, I went to the court and I met with the police officer beforehand. I told him how very sorry I was. When the time came for me to go before the judge, I remember very distinctly her looking at the stack of tickets that was about that thick. She looked up and she asked the prosecutor and asked incredulously, am I to understand that the state is dropping 3 out of 4 of these tickets and reducing the last ticket? Though my traffic offenses had been many, the police and the court had shown me great mercy. And today's gospel points to that idea of mercy, that idea of grace that we know about as Christians, that we long for many times. Many of you have heard this story before, the story of the woman with the alabaster jar. And where we find Jesus today, he is attending a banquet with the Pharisee Simon that he has been invited to. And out of nowhere appears someone who has not been invited, a town woman, someone who is sinful, shows up behind Jesus, falls at his feet, and starts washing his feet with her tears, drying them with her hair, and anointing his feet with ointment. Now, in hearing this story, we have two very perspectives that pop up immediately of what is happening. The first is Simon's. Luke writes the following: "Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what kind of woman this is who is touching him. She is a sinner." And immediately we see that tension arise, the tension between seeing and understanding. The Pharisee is witnessing something that is so scandalous, a woman with a certain reputation, breaking the code of purity, reaching out and touching Jesus, thus transferring her impurity onto him. And then she lets her hair down, which has sexual undertones. For the Pharisee, he sees this woman who's acting so inappropriately, who is so grossly out of place. For the Pharisee, he sees a woman who is guilty of many things, and that means she is not welcome there. Simon sees a woman who has stepped out of her place. But Jesus looks onto the scene differently. He says, "Do you see this woman, all the things that the host had not done to show hospitality, offer a kiss, wash his feet, anoint him? These are the very things that she had done, not as the hostess, and not even as someone who is welcome at that table. She did it as an outsider." Jesus not only sees this woman's actions, he understands them. Jesus knows her not for what she has done in the past, but instead for her act of contrition. Jesus knows her as a woman of faith. This act of seeing beyond what others have done and really truly knowing them is so difficult. It's so difficult for you and for me, and just as human beings, right? I love the story of Father Gregory Boyle. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He has cultivated this art of seeing beyond what meets the eyes over the course of decades. He is a priest in the poorest parish in Los Angeles, California. The area where he works is called Los Dolores Missions. And he writes a memoir called Tattoos on the Heart, which many of you might have read. He writes about this very difficult context where he does ministry among gang members, whom Boyle affectionately calls his homeboys and his homegirls. Out of his ministry emerged a business called Homeboy Industries, in which he guarantees to any gang member who will leave their gang a job, a means of gainful employment. He tells a story about his ministry growing in fame, and so 60 Minutes decides to feature it. And it talks about reporter Mike Wallace showing up with his entourage in a stretch limousine in the middle of this very poor neighborhood. And he has flaps on his jacket like he's ready to embark on a jungle safari. Father Boyle recounts walking around the neighborhood, introducing Wallace to the people in his ministry, the people who he works with on a day-to-day basis. At one point, Wallace sits down with Father Boyle and all of his homeboys and homegirls, and they're seated in a classroom, and he looks around, and then he looks at Father Boyle, and he looks at him incredulously, and he says, "You're not going to turn in any of them, are you?" Father Boyle laughed and he said, "Well, I didn't take my vows to the LAPD." Then Wallace looks around at each of these homeboys and homegirls and he goes, "He's not going to turn any of you in, is he? He's not going to turn any of you in." And then he looks at one of them and he says, "Why do you think that is?" And one of the homeboys answers, "I don't know, God, I guess." from the bird's eye view, from the view of a reporter, and from the view of society, Wallace sees the homeboys for what they've done in the past, for the cold hard facts, for the grievances and the pain that they have caused. He does not see the transformation that has happened within, and he doesn't see who they have become. He sees them for the crimes that they have committed, for the sins that have hurt so many. And yet Boyle is able to look beyond the surface. Boyle is able to extend compassion and to point them to the one who sees deeper, to the one who loves justice and who abounds in grace, to the one who knows them not as criminals, but instead as children of God, desperate for a second chance. Boyle points them to the one who extends love and acceptance when he finds them at his feet. Now, I am aware of where we are today. We're in Nutley, New Jersey. It's a far cry from Los Dolores in LA. But I ask you this question to contemplate in your hearts today. What would it be like if we could be seen for who we really are? What would it be like to be accepted, to be loved, to be shown mercy despite all that we have done? A while back, I watched one of the most popular TED Talks around. For those of you who don't know what a TED Talk is, it's different talks given by specialists in their fields about current themes, and they're put on the internet so that ideas can be passed around in a public forum. So one of the top 10 talks that many of you might have seen, it's like 10 million views, and it keeps on going, is Brene Brown's talk on shame and vulnerability. Brene Brown is a social worker and a researcher, and she was working towards her doctorate and thinking about the themes that came up while she was working in the field of social work. And so she began to look at how we engage in connection, and she noticed that our ability to connect with each other is affected by shame and vulnerability. She tells how she started to research relationships years ago. She compiled a lot of data, including interviews and focus groups. People even sent her pages of her journal. There was no shortage of data for her to collect about shame. While sifting through thousands of data, she said that she had a couple of themes emerge. The first is that it's clear that in principle all of us want to be connected in some way. Isn't that why we gather here in the church? And second, what separates us from others is that theme of fear and shame. Fear and shame are so powerful that they can remove our ability to connect with one another. She saw that there were courageous, brave of heart people who allow the shame to isolate them, to limit them from connecting with others, and those who were freed from it. What she found is that people who were connected had deep relationships, and they were more likely to be compassionate, courageous, and connected. Essentially, they were willing to be vulnerable. They weren't afraid, but rather that fear did not limit them from loving. That fear that exists in all of us did not limit them to forgive. That fear that exists in all of us did not limit them to be connected. They were willing, despite all of the shame and the fear that they were feeling, to peel back the layers and to show their true selves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They were willing, like this woman with the alabaster jar, to be seen, and they are desperately seeking to be loved and to receive the hand of grace from the one who provides us that mercy. And this is the good news to us on this Sunday morning. Despite what we have done, despite where we have fallen short, despite the shame that we feel about who we are, God sees us, God extends grace, and God invites us to be connected to him. God sees our brokenness, and despite that brokenness, God does not turn away when we reach out for him. God sees our exteriors and how we are defined within society, but God doesn't stop there. God sees beyond it and knows us and understands us. When others have moved away from us, when others have told us that we aren't invited to this table because of who they think we are or who they think we represent, God moves towards us. God does not flinch. God invites us to a place around the table. Jesus calls us to his feet when the world says that we don't belong at the banquet. He invites us to receive forgiveness, and he invites all of us, all over the world, to this table. Jesus invites us to abide in peace and love. Jesus promises that we won't just be seen. He promises that we are known as what we were truly created to be, beloved children of God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.